I asked God for a sign. What happened next changed me forever. My name is Olivia Grant, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. That night, I sat curled up on the bathroom floor, the cold tiles pressing against my skin, trying to breathe through the panic that gripped my chest like a vice. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling walls. But inside me, everything was screaming. I had just come from another doctor's appointment, the fifth in 2 months, and this time the words were final: multiple sclerosis. Chronic, progressive, no cure. I had nodded, thanked the neurologist, and walked out like I was fine. But I wasn't. I was terrified. I used to be the strong one, the dependable one, a high school teacher with a passion for literature and a heart for her students. I loved my job. I loved my life. But lately I couldn't trust my own body. The numbness in my legs, the tremors in my hands, the fatigue that made climbing stairs feel like scaling Everest. And now the diagnosis confirmed what I had feared but refused to believe. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable. My husband, Daniel, was asleep upstairs, unaware that I had crumbled into pieces just a few feet away. I didn't want to wake him. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to be comforted. I just wanted answers. God, I whispered, my voice cracking, if you're real, if you still see me, I need a sign, because I don't know how to live like this. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and relentless. I hadn't prayed in weeks, not since the symptoms worsened, not since I started missing work, not since I began questioning everything I believed. I felt abandoned, forgotten, like I was fatting from the inside out. The bathroom light flickered, probably just a faulty bulb, but in that moment it felt symbolic, like my faith, dim, unsteady, on the verge of going out. I didn't know it then, but that night would mark the beginning of something I couldn't yet see, a journey I never asked for, a transformation I didn't believe was possible. I used to think strength meant never showing weakness. I wore my independence like armor, teaching full-time, managing the household, volunteering at church, and still making time for PTA meetings. But behind the smiles and spreadsheets, I was running on fumes. The first time my hand went numb, I brushed it off. Stress, I told myself. Then came the blurred vision, the stumbling, the fatigue that felt like gravity had doubled. I kept pushing through, until one day I collapsed in front of my students. That was the beginning of the unraveling. The diagnosis came after months of tests, multiple sclerosis. I remember the doctor's voice, calm, clinical, as if he were reading a weather report. "It's manageable," he said, "but life will change." And it did, fast. I had to leave the classroom. My body wouldn't cooperate. My identity, the woman who could do it all, was slipping through my fingers. Daniel tried to be supportive, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We stopped laughing. We stopped dreaming. We stopped being us. Daniel and I used to talk about everything: politics, faith, our kids, our future. But now our conversations were reduced to logistics, prescriptions, bills, appointments. He'd come home tired, and I'd be too drained to pretend I was okay. One night, I asked him if he still saw me, the real me. He hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. I started sleeping in the guest room, telling myself it was for comfort, but really it was to avoid the silence. I missed him. I missed us, but I didn't know how to reach across the growing chasm between us. I felt like a burden, not just to him but to everyone. My kids tiptoed around me. Friends stopped calling. Church felt like a place for the healthy and hopeful, and I was neither. The distance grew. Every day felt like another step away from the life I once knew. I watched other families laugh at Sunday service and wondered if we'd ever feel whole again. It happened on a Tuesday. I had dropped a glass of water and couldn't bend down to pick it up. I just stared at the shards, trembling, then I screamed. Loud, ugly, raw. Daniel rushed in, but I couldn't speak. I just sobbed. He tried to hold me, but I pushed him away. "I'm not me anymore," I cried. "I don't know who I am." That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Pale, hollow, defeated. I whispered, "God, if you're there, I need you. I need something because I'm falling apart. I didn't expect an answer. I hadn't prayed in weeks, maybe months. My faith had become a memory, something I used to believe in when life made sense. But that night, something stirred. Not a voice, not a vision, just a deep ache, like my soul was reaching for something beyond the pain. I opened the Bible that had been gathering dust on my nightstand. It fell open to Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I read it again, and then I cried, not the bitter tears of despair, but something softer, something that felt like surrender. The words wrapped around my heart like a bandage. I didn't feel healed, but I felt seen. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone in this darkness. I stayed there on the bathroom floor for what felt like hours, clutching that Bible to my chest. The coldness of the tiles beneath me seemed less harsh. The silence felt less empty. When I finally stood up, my legs were shaky, but something inside me felt steadier. I didn't have answers. I didn't have healing. But I had a whisper of hope that maybe God hadn't forgotten me after all. The next morning, I went for a walk, slow, shaky, but determined. I ended up at a small coffee shop I hadn't visited in years. As I waited for my drink, an older woman approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. She smiled gently. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to tell you something. I blinked, unsure if I was hearing right. She continued, God hasn't forgotten you. He sees you. He's still writing your story. I stood there stunned. She didn't know me. She didn't know my pain, but her words pierced through the fog like sunlight. I thanked her, barely holding back tears. As she walked away, I whispered, Okay, God, I hear you. My hands trembled as I held my coffee cup. Was this the sign I had begged for? It seemed too simple, too ordinary. But something about her words felt like they had come from beyond her, like a message delivered just for me. The woman's words stayed with me. God hasn't forgotten you. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But belief doesn't erase pain, and mine was still very present. That week, my symptoms worsened. I fell twice in one day. My legs buckled without warning. I missed another appointment because I couldn't drive. Daniel was patient, but I saw the weariness in his eyes. He was carrying more than his share, and I hated that. I started isolating. I stopped answering texts. I skipped church. I told myself people didn't want to deal with my mess. I didn't want pity. I wanted healing. And when it didn't come, I spiraled deeper into resentment. I began questioning everything, my faith, my marriage, my worth. I felt like a mistake, like maybe I was being punished. The mirror became my enemy. Every glance reminded me of what I'd lost. The strong, capable woman I'd been seemed like a stranger from another lifetime. Now I was just broken pieces trying to hold together. One night, a thunderstorm rolled through Charlotte. I sat by the window, watching lightning split the sky. It felt like a mirror of my soul, chaotic, loud, unpredictable. I opened my journal and wrote, God, if you're good, why am I suffering? The words felt accusatory, but honest. I didn't want to pretend anymore. I flipped through the pages of my Bible, landing on Job. His story felt familiar, the loss, the questions, the silence, but also the endurance, the faith that clung to God even when everything else fell apart. I didn't feel strong like Job, but I whispered, help me hold on. The thunder rumbled outside, shaking the windows. I watched the rain hammer against the glass and thought about how storms always end. They rage and roar and terrify, but they pass. Maybe this storm inside me would pass too. I didn't feel better, but I felt less alone. Like Job, I was still questioning, but I was still here, still breathing, still searching. A few days later, I received a card in the mail, no return address, just my name and a handwritten note. Come as you are loved. Inside was an invitation to a women's retreat hosted by a local church. I almost threw it away. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't want to fake smiles or explain my condition. But something nudged me. Maybe this was the sign I had asked for. I registered, quietly, anonymously. I told Daniel I needed a weekend away. He nodded, relieved I was doing something for myself. I packed my bag with more doubt than hope, but I went. The drive to the mountains felt long. I almost turned back 3 times. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. What was I doing? What did I expect to find? But I kept driving. Something kept pulling me forward, even though every logical part of me wanted to retreat back to the safety of isolation. The retreat was held in the Blue Ridge Mountains, peaceful, serene, far from the noise of everyday life. I arrived late, limping slightly, unsure of what I was walking into. The first session was simple: testimonies. Women stood up and shared stories of addiction, divorce, depression, illness. And through every story, one thread remained: Jesus met them in their brokenness. I sat in the back, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one hurting, and somehow that truth began to soften the edges of my pain. During worship, I didn't sing, I just listened. And then something happened. Not dramatic, not loud, just a warmth in my chest, like peace was being poured into the cracks of my soul. I whispered, "Jesus, if you're here, I'm listening." And for the first time in months, I felt heard. The music washed over me like a gentle wave, and I let myself just be. No pretending, no performing, just existing in this moment of grace. I didn't come back from the retreat healed. My legs still trembled. My body still betrayed me, but something inside had shifted, a quiet strength, like a whisper that refused to be silenced. I started waking up early just to sit in silence with God. No fancy prayers, just honesty. Some mornings I cried, some mornings I just breathed, but every morning I showed up. Daniel noticed. He didn't say much, but he started sitting beside me during those quiet moments. We didn't talk, we just existed together, and somehow that was enough. The silence between us changed. It wasn't awkward anymore. It wasn't heavy with unspoken words and buried resentment. It was peaceful. We were learning to be present with each other again, without needing to fill every moment with words. I felt the gap between us slowly closing, not because everything was fixed, but because we were both choosing to show up, to try, to hope. One Sunday, I returned to church. I walked in slowly, unsure if I belonged. But as I entered, a woman I barely knew hugged me like we were old friends. "We've missed you," she said. During worship, I couldn't stand for long, but I raised my hands from my seat, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't praising because everything was fixed. I was praising because I wasn't alone. After service, I signed up for a small group. It felt risky, vulnerable, but I was done hiding. The decision scared me. What if they judged me? What if I became the group's charity case? What if I broke down in front of them? But I signed my name anyway. My hand shook as I wrote it, but I did it. I was choosing community over isolation. I was choosing to let people in, even though it terrified me. Maybe this was what faith looked like, doing the scary thing anyway, trusting that God would meet me there. The small group met every Thursday night. We shared meals, stories, and prayers. I told them about my diagnosis, my breakdown, my doubts, and they didn't flinch. They listened. They prayed. They showed up. One night, a woman named Carla shared her own journey with chronic illness. She looked me in the eyes and said, "God doesn't waste pain, He uses it." That sentence stuck with me. I began journaling again, not just my struggles, but my gratitude. I started seeing beauty in small things. My daughter's laughter, Daniel's hand on mine, the way the sun hit the kitchen window. The gratitude didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something else to focus on. I started noticing moments of grace scattered throughout my days like tiny gifts. A text from a friend, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving for work. These small things began to matter more than I ever thought possible. Daniel and I began talking again, really talking. We cried over the distance that had grown between us. We apologized. We forgave. One evening, he said, "I miss the way you used to light up when you taught." I smiled. "I miss it too." He looked at me, hopeful. "What if you found a new way to teach?" That night, we dreamed again. Not about what was lost, but about what could be. We stayed up late, talking about possibilities. Maybe I couldn't stand in front of a classroom anymore, but that didn't mean I had to stop teaching. Maybe there was a different way, a new way. Daniel pulled out his laptop and we started researching options. Online teaching, writing, blogging. The possibilities felt endless. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt excited about the future. Not because my circumstances had changed, but because my perspective had. I wasn't defined by what I'd lost. I was defined by what I chose to do next. I started a blog, Grace in the Gray, sharing my journey, my faith, my fight. People began writing in saying they felt seen, heard, encouraged. I wasn't the same Olivia who stood in front of a classroom, but I was still a teacher, still a storyteller, still a vessel. My body still had limits, but my spirit was free. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The first post was terrifying to publish. I hovered over the post button for 10 minutes before finally clicking it. What if no one read it? What if people judged me? What if I was too vulnerable? But then the messages started coming. One, then another, then dozens. People sharing their own stories, their own pain, their own search for hope. I realized I wasn't just writing for myself anymore. I was writing for them too. The blog started small, just a few posts about my journey, my doubts, and the flickers of hope I was beginning to see. But within weeks, messages poured in. Women from all over the country wrote to say they felt seen, that my story gave them courage to face their own. One woman shared that she had been diagnosed with MS too and hadn't told anyone. Another said she had stopped praying years ago, but something in my words stirred her heart again. I realized then, my pain wasn't wasted, it was being used. Every message felt like confirmation that God was doing something bigger than I could see. He was taking my broken pieces and creating something beautiful, not despite my pain, but through it. I started answering every message personally, praying for these women I'd never met, building connections across miles and circumstances. We were all walking through different storms, but we were walking together now. A local church invited me to speak at their women's night. I almost said no. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't polished. But I felt that nudge again, the same one that led me to the retreat. I stood on that stage, trembling, and told the truth. About the diagnosis, the breakdown, the silence, the sign, and the slow, sacred healing. I didn't preach, I just shared. And when I finished, the room was quiet, not because they were unmoved, but because they were undone. Women lined up to hug me, to cry, to say, "Me too." I stayed there for hours, listening to their stories. Each one different, but all marked by the same thread. Pain that needed to be seen, acknowledged, held. I hugged women I'd never met and felt like I'd known them my whole life. This is what community feels like, I thought. This is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not polished, just honest. Daniel and I began leading a couples group at church. We didn't pretend to have it all figured out. We just offered a space for honesty, grace, and growth. Our kids saw the change. They saw us praying together, laughing again, dreaming again. I still had bad days. MS didn't disappear. But I had peace. I had purpose. I had Jesus, not as a distant idea, but as a present companion. And that changed everything. Our daughter told me one night that she was proud of me. Those words broke me in the best way. I'd been so worried about being a burden to my family, about not being enough. But she saw something different. She saw courage. She saw faith. She saw love. Maybe I was teaching her something after all. Not from a classroom, but from the messy, beautiful reality of choosing faith in the middle of suffering. The blog grew. Thousands of people followed along. I shared the good days and the hard days, the victories and the setbacks, the moments of faith and the moments of doubt. I was honest about the days when I couldn't get out of bed, the days when my body refused to cooperate, the days when I cried and questioned and wondered if this was really God's plan. But I was also honest about the unexpected joys, the deep conversations with Daniel, the meaningful friendships from my small group, The messages from strangers who said my words helped them keep going. Life wasn't what I'd planned, but it was still beautiful, still meaningful, still worth living. I learned that God doesn't always give us the story we want, but He gives us the story we need. And sometimes, that story becomes someone else's lifeline. 21. 1 year after my diagnosis, I stood in my backyard watching the sunset. Daniel came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, more than okay. He kissed my temple. "I'm proud of you, you know that." I turned to face him. "I couldn't have done this without you." "We did it together," he said. And we had, through every fall, every fear, every tear we'd held on, to each other, to faith, to hope. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the bathroom floor a year ago, the desperate prayer, the plea for a sign. God had answered, not the way I expected, not with instant healing or an easy road, but with Himself, with presence, with purpose, and that was more than enough. 22. I received an email from a publisher. They'd been following my blog and wanted to turn it into a book about faith in the midst of suffering, about hope in the middle of darkness, about God's presence in the pain. I read the email 3 times, barely believing it. My story, the one I'd been too ashamed to tell, was going to help even more people. I called Daniel at work. "They want to publish my story." He laughed. "Of course they do. Your story is worth telling." I spent the next 6 months writing, pouring my heart onto pages, reliving the pain, but also rediscovering the grace. Every chapter was a reminder of how far I'd come, of how faithful God had been. The book became more than just my story. It became a testimony, a love letter to anyone who felt forgotten, abandoned, or alone in their suffering. 23. The book released on a Tuesday morning. I held the physical copy in my hands and cried. Not sad tears, grateful tears. God had taken my mess and made it a message. Reviews poured in. Messages flooded my inbox. Women wrote to say they'd prayed the same desperate prayer, that they'd asked God for a sign, that my story was their sign. I thought about the woman in the coffee shop, the one who told me God hadn't forgotten me. Maybe I was becoming that person for others now, the unexpected messenger, the reminder that God sees, God hears, God cares. Book signings turned into conversations. Strangers became friends. Every event reminded me that suffering connects us all, and hope heals us all. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life God had prepared, and it was beautiful. 24. I still have MS. My body still struggles. Some days are harder than others, but I've learned something profound. God doesn't always change our circumstances. Sometimes He changes us. I'm not the same Olivia who collapsed on that bathroom floor. I'm stronger, softer, more compassionate, more grateful. I've learned to hold my plans loosely, to trust God's timing, to find joy in the journey, not just the destination. Daniel and I are closer than ever. Our kids have a front row seat to real faith, the kind that asks questions, wrestles with doubt, and still chooses to believe. My small group sisters have become family. We cry together, pray together, celebrate together. They remind me that I'm never alone. And my blog continues to grow. Every week I share my journey, and every week people write to say, "Me too." That's all I ever wanted, to not be alone, and to make sure no one else feels alone either. 25. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be sharing this story, I would have laughed or cried. I thought my life was over. I thought God had gone silent. But He hadn't. He was just waiting for me to stop striving and start surrendering. Jesus didn't fix everything overnight. He didn't erase the diagnosis. But He gave me something better, Himself. And through Him, I found strength in weakness, beauty in brokenness, and hope in the middle of the storm. He still works wonders. I'm living proof. So if you're reading this, if you're tired, scared, angry, or numb, I want you to know you're not alone. Ask Him for a sign, whisper into the silence, cry if you need to, He hears you. And maybe this story is your sign. Jesus is still reaching, still healing, still restoring. And he's not done with you yet.